My name is Sam, and I'm from the northern part of the country. A few years ago, the company I work for sent me to the southern region to join one of their branches. It was a significant change, but it turned out to be the most important chapter of my life. After about a year and a half, I met Tina, the woman who would eventually become my wife. We fell deeply in love, and not long after, we got married. 3 years passed quickly, and life was going well. The company then decided to relocate me again, this time to the western part of the country. Despite the frequent moves, we adjusted as a family, my wife Tina and our 8-year-old daughter. However, our roots in the south remained strong, especially because Tina's family still lived there. One particular trip to the south stood out in my memory, though not entirely for pleasant reasons. We had gone to visit Tina's parents during a short leave I managed to get from work. It wasn't a long stay. We had only a few days. In fact, the timing wasn't entirely ideal, as Tina's family had planned a gathering in our honor. While such gatherings were meant to celebrate our visit, they often felt more like obligations than festivities. Instead of relaxing, we found ourselves caught up in hosting duties, making sure everyone else was entertained. By the end of the visit, instead of feeling refreshed, I felt drained. And then came the journey back, an experience I'll never forget. We had initially taken the train to Tina's hometown, but when it was time to return, my father-in-law offered us his car. At first, I declined. The car wasn't one I was familiar with, and I've always been uneasy about driving vehicles I don't trust. However, my father-in-law insisted. He explained that his son, Tina's brother, needed the car in the west, and they rarely used it in the south. Reluctantly, I agreed, and we packed our things into the car. Tina sat in the front passenger seat, and our daughter was in the back. I took the wheel, already nervous about the long drive ahead. Driving wasn't something I enjoyed or excelled at, and I preferred to keep my speed well below the limit. This cautious approach, unfortunately, stretched our journey into the late hours of the evening. The route took us through Jeddah, a quiet and isolated area with hardly any traffic. As darkness fell, an unsettling stillness seemed to settle over the road. With no other cars in sight, and the unfamiliar surroundings pressing in, the air grew heavy with unease. It was then that things began to feel off. My wife was lying peacefully with her head resting against her hand, while our daughter was curled up in the back seat, hugging her favorite doll tightly and dragging her little blanket over herself. They looked so serene, and I didn't want to disturb them. The road ahead was illuminated only by the car's headlights, casting long, eerie shadows that danced along the desolate path. I was exhausted. The monotonous hum of the engine combined with the emptiness of the road began to lull me into a dangerous drowsiness. To avoid waking my wife and daughter, I hadn't turned on the car radio. The silence, broken only by the faint sound of tires against the asphalt, was almost hypnotic. My eyelids felt unbearably heavy. I fought to keep them open, forcing myself to focus on the road ahead. But the strain was relentless. For just a fleeting moment, I gave in. My eyes closed. Then, panic. I jolted awake and instinctively tightened my grip on the steering wheel. In that split second, I saw her, a girl standing in the middle of the road, her figure illuminated by the sharp beam of the headlights. She looked young, fragile, and out of place, her pale face framed by long, dark hair that seemed to blend into the night itself. Time slowed down. In a frantic attempt to avoid hitting her, I swerved the steering wheel sharply to the left, then to the right, my heart pounding as I slammed on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt. "Tina, what happened?" My wife's voice was thick with grogginess and alarm as she sat up, her wide eyes darting around. Our daughter stirred in the back seat, clutching her doll tightly. I don't know," I stammered, still gripping the steering wheel with trembling hands. I think I hit someone." Without waiting for more questions, I stepped out of the car. The cool night air hit me like a splash of cold water, but it did little to calm my racing heart. The headlights lit up the road ahead, casting an unnatural glow over the asphalt. I looked everywhere, scanning the area for any sign of the girl, but there was nothing. No body, no blood, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. Tina's voice called out nervously from the car. "Sam, is everything okay?" "I don't see anything," I muttered, more to myself than to her. Still, I walked to the back of the car, my heart thundering as I inspected it for damage. But the car was untouched. No dents, no scratches. I felt a chill run down my spine. Could it have been a dream? A hallucination brought on by my exhaustion? It all felt so real. The sight of the girl, the sound of my tires screeching, the jolt of fear that had coursed through me. But she was gone. Nothing made sense. I returned to the driver's seat, unable to shake the unease that gripped me. Tina looked at me with concern, but didn't press for answers. Our daughter had drifted back to sleep, blissfully unaware of the strange encounter. As I restarted the car and pulled back onto the road, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. The darkness behind us seemed to stretch endlessly, as if swallowing any trace of what had just occurred. And yet, I couldn't escape the feeling that something or someone was still watching us. After checking the back of the car and finding nothing, I turned to get back inside. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something, a figure illuminated by the headlights. My heart stopped. It looked like the girl again, standing just beyond the light's reach. Without thinking, I ran toward her, my pulse pounding in my ears. I reached the front of the car, where the beams of the headlights flooded over me. But as I got closer, the figure vanished into thin air. Nothing. There was nothing there. A cold chill crept over me, far deeper than the night's cool air. My breathing was ragged as I stood frozen, staring into the emptiness. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was my exhaustion playing tricks on me, or was something far more sinister at work? Shaken, I returned to the car. Tina was waiting, her face etched with concern. "What happened?" she asked. I hesitated, still trying to steady my thoughts. I don't know," I admitted. "It's like I was dreaming, but I swear I saw a girl on the road. I thought I hit her." Tina looked at me intently. "But there was nothing out there, right?" I nodded. "No, nothing." Trying to push the unease aside, I reached for the car key to start the engine. But as my hands searched for it, a new wave of panic washed over me. The key wasn't in the ignition. Frantically, I patted my pockets, checking over and over, but it wasn't there either. "Where is it?" I muttered under my breath, my voice trembling. Tina glanced at me, then pointed toward the ground outside the car. "It's there," she said softly. I stepped out to retrieve it, and as I bent down to pick up the key, a strange sensation washed over me, a prickling at the back of my neck, as if someone were watching me. I stood up slowly and turned toward the car. My eyes widened in disbelief. Two glowing eyes stared back at me from inside the car, peering from the driver's seat, just behind the wheel. They weren't human. They were sharp, unblinking, and filled with an unnatural intensity. I froze, unable to move, as if those eyes had locked me in place. Then, without warning, something struck me on the head. I stumbled backward, gripping my temple as a sharp pain spread through my skull. Tina and my daughter didn't seem to notice. They were still inside, sitting quietly, oblivious to what had just happened. And then the car roared to life. On its own, the engine started, and the vehicle lunged forward with startling speed, aimed directly at me. The headlights blazed brighter than ever, blinding me as the car closed in. I tried to leap aside, but my legs felt as though they were stuck in place. I braced myself for the impact, but before I could react further, everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I found myself back in the driver's seat. My hands were clutching the wheel tightly, and the car was veering off the road. With a gasp, I yanked it back onto the track, my heart pounding as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. It couldn't have been real. Could it? All of it. The figure, the eyes, the car moving on its own. It felt so vivid, yet impossibly surreal. "Tina?" I said, my voice shaky. She turned to me, her own concern evident. "What's wrong? You look pale." I shook my head. "Nothing. I'm just tired." Sensing my discomfort, Tina stayed awake and began talking to me, trying to keep me engaged. Her voice was soothing, a tether to reality. Slowly I began to calm down, though the unease lingered. I kept driving, but something deep inside told me this journey was far from over. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind kept drifting back to the mirror. My daughter's voice snapped me back to reality. "Dad, did you see that girl?" A chill ran down my spine, and my heart skipped a beat. I turned to her, my voice tight with stress. "Which girl?" She pointed toward the darkness outside, her eyes wide. There was a girl in a white and red dress. She was looking at us. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My heart raced and my thoughts scrambled. I forced myself to remain calm. "You must be mistaken. It's too dark out there." She was quiet for a long moment, then shrugged, her little shoulders dropping as though she had said everything she needed to say. Her silence was unnerving, but the look she gave me was too serious to ignore, too real to dismiss. That's when it hit me. The girl she described was exactly the same one I had seen. The white and red dress, the eerie way she had appeared out of nowhere. I tried to refocus on the road, but my mind wouldn't let go of the vision. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, and all I wanted was to reach the city, to escape this nightmare. I cursed myself for agreeing to take the car. Why hadn't I just refused as I had originally intended? Now we were in the middle of nowhere, in the dark, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of winding, isolated roads, a faint glow appeared on the horizon. My heart lifted. Maybe it was the city we had been hoping for. But as we drew closer, my hope quickly turned to disappointment. It wasn't a city at all. It was just a gas station, its lights dim and flickering. Still, we couldn't be choosy. At least we'd have a place to stop and gather our bearings. I pulled into the station, relieved to finally find a bit of light in the oppressive darkness. The car slowed, and we came to a stop beside the pump. The lights above the pump flickered weakly before going out entirely. "This is just great," I muttered under my breath. The pump was either broken or out of fuel, and no one was around to help. With a sigh, I turned off the engine and told Tina and our daughter to stay in the car. I needed to find someone, anyone, who could help us. Walked over to the small convenience store next to the station, the only sign of life in the otherwise empty place. As I reached the door, I noticed it was slightly ajar, and the faint light spilling from inside made it seem even more inviting. I hesitated for a moment, the uneasy feeling returning in full force, but then I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was thick, smelling faintly of stale coffee and oil, and the interior was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering in an almost rhythmic pattern. The shelves were sparse, stocked with a random assortment of goods. It was a small, nondescript place, but as my eyes adjusted to the low light, I felt something was off. The silence in the store was oppressive, almost too quiet. There was no sign of anyone behind the counter, no customers, not even the usual hum of a store's atmosphere. I walked further in, my footsteps echoing in the silence. But not only was no one there, but all the shelves were completely empty. The feeling of isolation intensified, and my unease grew. I took a few more steps into the store, my eyes scanning the barren space. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence from behind me. "Hello," I froze. A chill ran through me, and I quickly turned around, spotting a man walking toward me with a cage in his hands. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence, and his gaze was fixed on the ground ahead. "Do you want gas?" he asked, his voice flat and emotionless, still not meeting my eyes. I was taken aback by the strange, almost mechanical tone in his voice. "Yes," I replied, "my gas light is on." He continued his task, completely ignoring me, and I couldn't understand why he wasn't responding. "Can you come back?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. But when I looked again, he wasn't there. The emptiness around me felt suffocating, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I spun around, hoping to catch a glimpse of him, but the store was still empty. My heart hammered in my chest. Where did he go? I whispered to myself. I hurried to the door, desperate to get out, but as I turned to leave, I saw her. The girl, the same girl from Road. My breath caught in my throat, and before I could process what was happening, my legs moved of their own accord, carrying me out of the store at a speed I didn't think was possible. I didn't stop until I reached the car, slamming the door behind me and sinking into the seat. Tina and Mira were still there, and for a brief moment I thought I had escaped whatever nightmare this was. But then Mira spoke up, her voice quiet but certain. "Dad, look, the same girl." I turned to follow her gaze, and my stomach twisted in horror. There she was again, standing outside near the pump, her white and red dress almost glowing in the dim light. She was staring at us, her eyes fixed and unblinking. Panic surged through me. Without thinking, I started the car, slamming my foot on the gas pedal. We lurched forward, the tires screeching as I sped away. I dared a glance in the rearview mirror, and my blood ran cold. The girl was standing there, watching us as we drove off, her figure fading into the distance. I didn't know what was real anymore, and I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there, away from the darkness and whatever horrors it held. We hadn't gone much farther when the gaslight flickered on, signaling we were running low. We arrived in a small town and stopped at an inn for the night. Tina and Mira, exhausted from the long journey, fell asleep early, but I couldn't find rest. My mind was consumed by that girl, the one in the white and red dress. I couldn't shake the image of her staring at us, watching us as we drove away. What was she? Why was she following us? The unsettling thought gnawed at me through the night, leaving me restless. As I lay there in the dark, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next day, we continued on our journey, but I didn't see the girl again. I thought maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was over. But then things took a turn. Every few nights, Mira would tell us she saw the girl again. She said the girl was standing at the edge of the road, her eyes following our car as we drove. I couldn't believe it. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, just a child's imagination running wild. But the fear in Mira's voice made me question everything. It wasn't just Mira who was affected. Tina and I, too, couldn't forget that night. We talked about it, but neither of us could come to terms with what had happened. There was always this lingering doubt. Despite the years that had passed, we hadn't forgotten her. And as time went on, we realized that Mira kept seeing the girl, even when we couldn't. We didn't know if it was some kind of spirit or something else entirely. What we did know was that it was real to Mira, and the girl was never far from her thoughts. To this day, we haven't had any harm come to us, but my parents insist that Mira be taken to see a prayer writer, someone who could rid her of whatever this was. I disagreed. I didn't trust the idea. I didn't know anyone I could rely on, and I wasn't about to put my daughter in the hands of strangers. But the worry stayed with me. What if something was out there? What if the girl wasn't just a figment of our imagination, but something far darker?